Thanks to studios like Naughty Dog, Santa Monica, or Guerrilla, Sony is able to put out high-quality exclusives more frequently than Xbox and even Nintendo. However, when you take a look at what the lineup of Sony studios was like just 6 years ago, in early 2012, you'd find out that it included 5 more developers. 5 great teams that were all capable of producing innovative games, acclaimed by critics and beloved by fans. Big Studios, Zipper Interactive, Studio Liverpool, Evolution, Guerrilla Cambridge. All of them got shut down by Sony somewhere between 2012 and today. But why? What are the outcomes? And are any of PlayStation's current developers in danger? This is Mario from GameGround. Sit back, relax, and enjoy as we uncover the answers. Shortly after the launch of the PlayStation Portable in 2005, a small, UK-based studio named Big put out its first title. It was a really cool action game for the PSP called Pursuit Force. It did well and it clearly impressed Sony as they bought the developer 2 years later. At that point, Sony assigned Big to work on exclusives for the portable PlayStation consoles. After Pursuit Force, a sequel with the subtitle Extreme Justice was released. And then, Big brought the MotorStorm series to a handheld for the first time with MotorStorm Arctic Edge. All of these were received positively and were successful. But then came the PlayStation Vita. And Big made Little Deviants, a collection of minigames not relying on traditional controls, but made to highlight Vita's new features like the 2-touch surfaces, motion sensors, or cameras. Much like the system it came out on, the game flopped. Unfortunately, it brought down the entire studio with it. Sony shut down Big in January 2012. Zipper Interactive was an American dev best known for its SOCOM franchise. Between 2002 and 2006, they released 6 SOCOM games for PS2 and PSP. The series had a large fan base, especially in the United States, and enthusiasts are longing for it to return to this day. With the arrival of PlayStation 3, however, Zipper wanted to create something brand new, and with MAG, or Massive Action Game, they sure did. It was an online first-person shooter in which up to 256 people could battle on one map at the same time. In fact, even today, it still holds the Guinness World Record for most players online in a console FPS. The title was no doubt a technical achievement, though as it later turned out, size doesn't always matter, and releasing a multiplayer-only console shooter was an idea ahead of its time back in 2010. MAG failed, and so did Zipper's following project, SOCOM 4. Zipper aimed to combine the modern gameplay of games like Call of Duty with the classic SOCOM mechanics. The result was generally disappointing, but Sony did give Zipper one last chance. But then came the PlayStation Vita. Even though it underperformed, Unit 13 was not a bad game. Regardless, it was perceived as just a generic shooter, making it Zipper's 3rd misfire in a row. Zipper was working on 2 PS4 projects until Sony shut the studio down in March 2012. 10 years before the first PlayStation, Psygnosis Limited was founded in Liverpool, England. They became well known in the 90s, especially thanks to publishing The Lemmings by DMA Design, a studio today known as Rockstar North. Sony acquired Psygnosis in 1993, and PlayStation would not be where it is today if it weren't for Psygnosis. Not only did their games account for a large portion of the PlayStation software sales in the early days of the console, but Psygnosis played a huge role in the creation of PS1 dev kits too. Also in the PS1 era, Psygnosis created 2 IPs near and dear to the hearts of many hardcore PlayStation fans, Colony Wars and, more importantly, Wipeout. In the year 2000, they were renamed to Studio Liverpool, and throughout the following decade, they put out 7 Formula 1 titles, in addition to 4 entries to the Wipeout series across PS2, PSP, and PS3. While the Wipeout games were always superb, with impressive visuals and intense gameplay, the franchise didn't ever go mainstream. The sales were good enough for the Liverpool-based studio not to be closed, but then came the PlayStation Vita. Wipeout 2048 sold poorly, despite being one of the best reviewed Vita launch titles. Sony shut down Studio Liverpool in August 2012. Yet their soul lived on as a PS4 remaster titled Wipeout Omega Collection came out in 2017. It is the best way to play Wipeout today, and I encourage you to check it out. What I didn't mention when talking about Big is that they were a satellite of a larger studio, Evolution. Around the break of the century, Sony was looking for a team to create games with the World Rally Championship license. The newly formed Evolution was working on a PC racing demo that sparked Sony's interest, and Evolution was eventually tasked with creating WRC games exclusively for the PS2. When the PS3 came around, Evolution introduced its first original IP, MotorStorm. It did favorably in every respect, and consequently, Sony bought the dev a few months after the release. A sequel, Pacific Rift, came out in 2008, and it was likewise a hit. However, the third game in the series, MotorStorm Apocalypse, flopped. Ironically, two terrible disasters in Japan and New Zealand had occurred just days before Apocalypse was scheduled to release. For that reason, the title was delayed, and when it finally launched, it went mostly unnoticed. And then came another disaster, the PlayStation Vita. Incredibly, Evolution managed to survive. That's because rather than going all in and releasing a big budget Vita-only game like all the other studios on this list did, Evolution made a small downloadable title called MotorStorm RC, which came out simultaneously for the PS3 as well. It exceeded expectations, but that is not even remotely true for their next and last game, Drive Club. Even though it was supposed to be a PS4 launch title, it ended up releasing almost a full year later. After many updates, Drive Club is now an excellent racing game, but the initial reactions were very mixed. Drive Club's underwhelming release was the final nail in the developer's coffin. Sony shut down Evolution in March 2016. In 1997, a company then known as Millennium Interactive was sold to Sony and renamed to Cambridge Studio. In just 13 years, the team was able to put out 12 games across PS1, PS2, PSP, and PS3 under the new name. Many of the titles were average and are now long forgotten, while others, like the Medieval series or the PSP version of Little Big Planet, are critically acclaimed gems. But then came the PlayStation Vita, and the developer got assigned to bring the Killzone franchise from Guerrilla Games to the handheld. They got renamed to Guerrilla Cambridge, and Killzone Mercenary came out in 2013. It got positive reviews and the sales weren't too bad considering it was a Vita exclusive. Even so, it still likely wasn't profitable for Sony. It wouldn't be very surprising if their owner decided to close down the studio at this point in time. Luckily, Sony needed a lineup of exclusives for the launch of PSVR, and they tasked Cambridge with making one. They came out with Riggs, a multiplayer-focused VR-only shooter. Like Killzone Mercenary, Riggs was also a quality game, but given how big budget it must have been, it probably wasn't profitable either. Sony closed Guerrilla Cambridge in January 2017. So these are the 5 defunct studios I wanted to focus on. Press subscribe to pay respect. All of them were shut down for one of the 2 reasons. Reason number 1, investing too heavily into one of Sony's secondary platforms, meaning that instead of making exclusives for PS3 or PS4, they were made to, or they decided to, make a AAA game for a device with a much smaller user base, namely the Vita or PlayStation VR. This was the case for Big with Little Deviants, Zipper with Unit 13, Liverpool with Wipeout 2048, and Guerrilla Cambridge with both Killzone Mercenary and Riggs. Reason number 2, placing too much emphasis on multiplayer. The types of exclusives PlayStation gamers want the most are story-based single-player games. Making an online-centric title is a huge risk for Sony's first-party developers, as it's neither their area of expertise, nor is it what the fans are asking for. When they do take the risk, it usually doesn't pay off. MAG was online only, and multiplayer was also a major focus of SOCOM 4. These 2 games marked the beginning of the end for Zipper. Drive Club, the title that killed Evolution, also revolved around multiplayer, and so did Riggs, the final game from Guerrilla Cambridge. Failure is the mother of success. Thankfully, Sony and its first-party studios have learned from their mistakes. When you look at the titles they've been releasing lately and the projects they're working on, they are neither online heavy, nor are they PSVR or, God forbid, Vita titles. By the way, a side note, I love the PlayStation Vita. I even made a tribute video to it. Hardware-wise, it was stunning when it first came out, and there are many amazing games for it. However, abandoning the Vita was the right thing to do for Sony, as it paved the way for PS4's triumph. Anyway, Sony Interactive Entertainment now seems to have a clear vision of what types of games they want to make, and that is really paying off. They keep delivering literally hit after hit, compared to more of a hit after two misses situation during the PS3 era. As sad and unfortunate as the stories of the closed studios are, it wasn't for nothing. Regardless, it's hard not to wonder, what if Sony adopted its current strategy earlier? It's hard not to ask oneself, what if some of the teams we've talked about had a chance to make a single-player focused PlayStation 4 game? It's hard not to be curious about what these titles would be like. A new MotorStorm from Evolution, a PS4 SOCOM from Zipper, a Guerrilla Cambridge developed full-featured Killzone game, Wipeout made from the ground up for this generation, or even a new Pursuit Force from Big Big. I strongly believe that all of these games could have met the expectations players today have for PlayStation exclusives, and I doubt that such titles would have been the last ones from their developers, but it's not happening. The studios are dead, and now we just have to hope that the same fate doesn't await any of Sony's current teams. Sadly though, it might. While the most respected devs, like Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, Guerrilla, and probably also Polyphony, Sucker Punch and Sony Bend seem to be completely safe today, that can't be said about others. To be exact, I have two teams in mind. Both are in the UK, and given that 4 out of 5 closed studios we've talked about were also based there, this makes their closure even easier to imagine. The first one is, you've guessed it, Media Molecule. They are an incredibly talented team of creative minds known mainly for Little Big Planet. The first game, as well as Little Big Planet 2, both went above expectations. But then came the PlayStation Vita, and Media Molecule split into two groups. One developed Tearaway, a Vita exclusive that was later brought over to PS4 too. It was highly praised by reviewers, but it did not sell that well on either platform. The other team, and now presumably the entire studio, has been working on a super ambitious PS4 game first shown at the PS4 reveal event. It was later announced to be called Dreams. It will have a story campaign and cooperative and competitive multiplayer modes, but the developer's goal with Dreams is to let players easily create and share anything and everything, from music to films to games. Basically a 3D take on Little Big Planet and then some. As of today, Dreams has been in development for over 6 years, and it still doesn't even have a date. Media Molecule says they have a long-term plan for Dreams after it launches, but sadly, and I truly hope I'm wrong about this, I don't really think they'll be around to realize this plan. The second studio which I consider to be in danger is Sony London. These are basically the guys PlayStation goes to when they need games for their secondary platforms, or just the kind of games that hardcore gamers couldn't care less about, like iPad, SingStar or The Playroom. Maybe Sony wants to have a team for such purposes, or maybe they need them since the London studio also plays a role in the R&D of PlayStation hardware and development tools. Nevertheless, I wouldn't be too surprised if Sony chose to close down this one. After all, 3 of their most recent releases, in addition to their upcoming project, Blood and Truth, don't even have Wikipedia entries. There is one last developer I'd like to mention, and that is Sony San Diego. In addition to helping out other teams, for instance with Mod Nation Racers, Sports Champions or Drawn to Death, they are the devs of MLB The Show series, whereas these titles do have a loyal fan base in the United States. In other parts of the world, the demand for baseball games is virtually non-existent, making the sales quite low compared to other PlayStation exclusives. Thanks to the devoted MLB fans, the studio might be safe for now, but the future of Sony San Diego is questionable to me. All in all, I really hope these three studios will not get killed, as I believe that PlayStation and the gaming industry as a whole are better off with them alive. By the same token, I don't think the 5 studios we talked about earlier should have been shut down. Nonetheless, as I've mentioned, I'd say that their failure stories helped Sony get on the right track and ultimately helped PlayStation get the great lineup of exclusives it has today and the even better one it should have tomorrow. And this has been GameGround. See you around.